Well, Britain has officially recognised Libya's rebels as the legitimate government and expelled all Colonel Gaddafi's diplomats. It's also unfreezing $150 million worth of Libyan oil assets to help fund the rebels. We're going to cross live now to the UK to speak to Mark Almond, a professor of modern history at Oxford University. Good to see you, sir. So a bit of house cleaning going on at the embassy in London, kicking out some of the Libyan diplomats there. But let's talk about the broader picture here. The opposition is basically winning the war without winning any battles. How can they represent a country they don't even control?
Well, I think this is a problem. Traditionally, Britain has recognised governments not on the basis of whether we like them or not, but on whether they control the territory of the state. Colonel Gaddafi may have lost control of parts of Libya, but clearly the rebels don't control it yet. So this is setting a new precedent, and perhaps a rather dangerous one. The other problem is that the rebels on the ground seem to have stalled, even with the NATO bombing raids. And if we remember when this started more than 4 months ago, we were told it would be a matter of weeks rather than months. And so I suspect really what William Hague, the British Foreign Secretary, is doing is really having a symbolic act to try to show that somehow or other we're still in charge of the situation. But I think the situation is increasingly unpredictable.
Well, now, you talk about that. Tripoli told the UN envoy recently there will be no peace talks until NATO stops the airstrikes, and yet the bombings continue. How much does NATO really want peace for Libya? What is the agenda?
Well, I think, although the official reason originally was, of course, to prevent Colonel Gaddafi's troops capturing Benghazi and massacring his opponents there, in practice, very quickly, the US, as well as the British and French governments, announced that they wanted regime change. They wanted Colonel Gaddafi to go. And I think they rather cavalierly thought that he would collapse very quickly. It's turned out that his regime is more resilient. It's turned out that the European NATO power is very inadequate. Britain, after all, had cancelled its aircraft carrier and scrapped its Harrier fighter bombers, so that we really went into this war with almost gay abandon, thinking that Colonel Gaddafi would flee to Venezuela, as William Hague already had him on his way at the beginning of the crisis.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you talk about when the Western forces, Allied forces, went into this war, it was supposed to be a humanitarian mission. Now, if I may, just for a moment, according to media reports, Gaddafi now controls more territory than before NATO started bombing. Does the alliance think that the Libyan leader is going to surrender? It looks like he's doing fairly well at this point.
Well, I think certainly he's doing much better than certainly any of the outside forces anticipated. And the real problem for NATO is that unless they have a lucky strike, as they've tried several times, I think, to decapitate Colonel Gaddafi's regime by bombing places where they thought he was, the chances are that there won't be a dramatic collapse of his regime. Now, it survived the first shock impact. And so now the question is, will the rebels have sufficient resources to push on through perhaps months more fighting, or will their own divisions, their own inadequacies, their ill training and ill discipline gradually shift support back to Colonel Gaddafi? Will many Libyans...
Sorry to interrupt again, but you mentioned the issue of will the rebels have resources. The frozen oil assets of Gaddafi are being handed over to the rebels now. I must ask you, where is the money going? Is it just lining the pockets of the new transitional council so they can buy luxury yachts and big fancy cars? Or is it perhaps a way to bait them so that the West can have more of a presence in Libya, to have more of a control on its natural resources?
Well, of course, it's I think, difficult to avoid the conclusion that the crisis in Libya is certainly a great deal about oil. And one of the problems has been that the rebels who thought that very quickly they would get hold of the oil assets and the capacity to turn oil exports into money haven't been able to operate the oil fields at all effectively. They need money to maintain their forces because, A, they need money for their social services such as they are, but also they need money really to buy support. And I'm afraid one subterranean aspect of this conflict is each side pays for mercenaries. We heard a lot about Colonel Gaddafi paying for his supporters, but we've rather overlooked how far the rebels fight in return for cash. And of course, if there isn't cash flow, they don't fight. And this is one of the reasons why Colonel Gaddafi's forces, who are perhaps better motivated, maybe better paid, have actually been able to resist rather more effectively than Paris and London expected.
Now, yesterday Britain's foreign minister said that Gaddafi could actually stay in Libya if he stepped down. It seems like a bit of a change of heart here. Does NATO have any idea what it's doing or how this will end? It just seems like it's in one enormous mess.
It is a big mess because, after all, Britain and France, along with the United States, pressed for Colonel Gaddafi to be indicted by the International Criminal Court of The Hague. therefore, they shouldn't really be in a position to decide what his fate is. In theory, this international tribunal will decide his fate. Now Alain Juppé and William Hague are saying it's not up to Britain and France to decide who rules Libya. I think if we look back over their statements in the last few months, we would have a very strong impression that they had a good idea who should be ruling Libya and also what the fate of Gaddafi should be. So, in practice, this symbolic decision to recognise the rebels, to kick out Gaddafi's diplomats from London, masks, I think, a deep embarrassment and indeed a strategic crisis for the NATO countries led by Britain and France.
Mark Arment from Oxford University, many thanks.
Thank you.